Now let's talk about an issue of food spoilage. That is a universal issue, and there is a lot of wastage of food globally that is putting a lot of pressure on the natural resources. So if we define the spoilage of food, that would mean that undesirable changes in the properties of product such as food. It is called as food spoilage. It can be in different forms, whether it's a physical form, a chemical form of spoilage, or a biological form of spoilage. So we classify the food spoilage in three different categories: physical, chemical, biological spoilage. And let's see what are the effects of this spoilage on food. I think the most predominant one is the loss in the nutritional value of food. Most of the spoilage, whether it's chemical, physical, or biological, that have got a direct influence on the nutritional value of food. Another change is the organoleptic properties. By organoleptic properties, what is meant is we can assess the food by our five senses, like sense of smell, touch, sight, touch, and other senses, hearing, etc., texture, mouthfeel. So these are all the kind of properties, the sensorial properties of food which get affected. For example, if the change in flavor occurs due to this food spoilage, or if there is a change in the color of a food product due to spoilage, that would not be much more attractive to the consumer, so it would not have the desirable effects. For example, color is another thing. You can assess that if the color is degraded or is changed in, say for example, in fruits or green vegetables, if they are not dark green in color, so that change in color would affect the quality of food. So the buying decision that has to be made by the consumer would be negative, because the food would not be taken as a fresh food. But other than these things, I think the most important factor that has to be considered for food spoilage is the safety concerns. Food safety is a global issue. There are burning issues. There are coming a lot of new reports every day about the incidents involving food safety, where it causes a lot of illness, a lot of hospitalization cases, and even deaths. They are due to the food spoilage, maybe whether it's microbiological in nature or chemical in nature, but this food spoilage has got major importance on the safety concerns that are attached to the food consumption. There are two terms, food spoilage and biodegradation. These terms are actually quite different. For example, the biodegradation, it's said to be occurred when complex molecules are broken down into simpler molecules. And these reactions of breaking down complex molecules into simpler molecules are actually important for the ecosystem. For example, we prefer most of the biodegradable products. There's a lot of debate about using new materials which are biodegradable for packaging of food, or using the natural products which are biodegradable, because they are not going to put much more pressure on the environment, and they can be degraded and recycled in the natural environment. So this is basically biodegradation. On the other hand, food spoilage, the similar kind of reactions might be involved in food spoilage as well. For example, the breakdown of complex molecules into simpler molecules. But this is undesirable change. That is not something that we want to achieve, whereas biodegradation is something that is positive for the environment. Unlike to that, food spoilage is something that is making our food unsafe. And there's a lot of economic losses and wastage that is related to the food spoilage. So these are basically two different aspects of breaking down complex molecules into simpler molecules. If we talk about, again, the types of food spoilage, it could be chemical food spoilage. Chemically spoilage of food can be defined in other different kind of processes like biochemically assimilatory food spoilage and biochemically dissimilatory food spoilage. We'll discuss this in the next slide. And the physical form of food spoilage, that can be mechanical food spoilage, for example, a mechanical damage or breakdown of the products, or it could be fouling or smelling. It can be change in the color of food as well. So this comes under the physical form of food spoilage. This biochemical assimilatory process is basically a process of microorganisms where the microorganisms feed on the food for their own growth. So they are basically assimilating the nutrients from the food for their own growth. So this is called as biochemical assimilatory food spoilage. Unlike that, the biochemical dissimilatory food spoilage is different because it does not involve the growth of microorganisms due to the feeding on the food. Rather, the microorganisms are growing inside the food. They are using that medium for the growth, and they are adding something to the food which may be undesirable. For example, the secondary metabolites. So they may be producing a lot of waste products that gets into the food product. That would make the food spoiled or undesirable at the end. As I said, that the physical form of spoilage, it can be mechanical in nature, where the food is disrupted or damaged. For example, most of the cereal grains, they can be broken, they can be shriveled. Some of the fruits and vegetables, they might be partially consumed by birds, etc. So they, of course, they would not be desirable. They would not be bought in the market. Another thing is soiling or fouling of product. If we add any material from environment, for example, soils or some other undesirable, objectionable things that compromise the hygiene of the food, so that also comes under the physical form of spoilage of food. And that would make food unacceptable to the final consumer, and that unacceptability would lead to the wastage, in a sense that that product would not be sold in the market. So that would be basically treated as a return product. So that leads to the economic loss, in fact. So this was all about the food spoilage, different kinds of food spoilage, and the effect of that food spoilage on food products.